Are you unhappy in your relationship? You may be dealing with emotional abuse or even physical abuse, yet you can't walk away. This morning we're delving into the reasons why people stay in abusive relationships despite being unhappy.
With us now to discuss the importance of spotting the early warning signs of an abusive relationship is author and counsellor Jim O'Shea. Good morning to you, Jim.
Good morning, Anna.
Jim, what constitutes an abusive relationship, first of all?
I suppose the very core of an abusive relationship is inequality. That's the very core of it. And I suppose the really important thing is to understand the abusive personality, because it's a Jekyll and Hyde. So you have the nice Jekyll and the nasty Hyde. Mm-hmm. Now, unfortunately, it's the nice Jekyll that the victim meets first. And we'll take it in this case that the male is the abusive person, but males and females are equally abusive, and that really has to be said. So the early warning signs is that all, or almost all, abusers are charming. Now, I'd have to say that a charming person is not necessarily an abuser, but abusers are always charming. So that's one of the warning signs. And a real warning sign is that the abusive person tries to make an early commitment. He asks for an early commitment. And when you put those two together, it's a real warning sign. You have a charmer who charms off your feet, puts you on a pedestal. And I suppose there's a saying in the context of abuse that a pedestal is as good a prison as any other small place. Mm-hmm. So they make you feel very special. They tell you they love you. So in the book, there's the story of Linda and her husband Stephen. These are not their real names, obviously. Sure. And Stephen is a real epitome of what an abusive person is. So shortly after they met, she came home one evening, and he called her into the sitting room, and there were candles there and wine, and he told her he loved her, and loved her, and that's really a good example of looking for an early commitment. He asked her to marry him. And shortly after that, they were in Linda's home, and he said to her father that we'll be moving in together soon. Now, she didn't know this, so he controlled everything, because abuse is about power and control, and it's done through various means.
But it's very interesting, Jim, that you point all this out. But up until such time as he displayed an unpleasant or a nasty characteristic,
yes,
all of this would make Linda feel like she had won the lottery of love.
Oh, absolutely. That's how she felt, yeah.
Swept off her feet.
This is what she dreamed of.
Swept off her feet, yeah, the luckiest woman on earth. And that's how it's done.
So are you saying that when it's too good to be true, the chances are it is?
Yeah, maybe. But you need to be aware of this, particularly a quick commitment. I mean, I always ask people who come to me for counselling, you know, who have been abused, did he ask you to marry him quickly? And the answer is always yes.
Right.
Always yes.
I found, if we can just take a few steps backwards, I found the early stages where Linda claims that she rarely would you see one without the other. They did everything together. Yeah. I found that really worrying, because I don't think that's healthy at all in any relationship, is it?
Well, it's not. Yes, you need. There are three spaces in a relationship. You have two individual spaces, and you have a mutual space. You know. So it is worrying, but people, when they're swept off their feet, they don't see this.
They're blinded.
And that's the problem. But then the nasty Jekyll, abusive people cannot hide the nasty side for very long. And that is because inside they're very vulnerable. And this happens early in childhood, probably due to a fear of abandonment. Mm-hmm. All abusive people have this awful fear of abandonment. And that's where the control comes from, because if they can control you, well, then they're not going to be abandoned. I suppose that's maybe a simplistic explanation of it. But
then why do they abuse the people who are providing this comfort or security for them?
Well, the abusive personality thinks differently within an intimate relationship. So they have this great sense of entitlement. They feel they're entitled to have all their needs met by the person, by the victim, if you like. And if the needs aren't met, they become very irritable. But the main thing is that even, you know, after a short time, the nasty Hyde begins to emerge. So there are serious warning signs there. Again, other ones are more nasty ones. By the way,
Jim, there's a myriad ways that this can manifest itself without it ever actually getting physical. So, you know, I mean, it's very obvious. Somebody raises your hand or beats you or hurts you or whatever, well, then that's a very clear sign. But there's 1,000 subtle ways that you can be emotionally hit and punched.
Well, there are, but I mean, if you look at the different types of abuse, you have physical abuse, which is domestic violence. Then you have domestic abuse, and that would be verbal abuse, and financial abuse, and psychological abuse, and sexual abuse.
Is control of the money and say, well, now let's get to two things: the finance and the sex. Is control of the money a very early warning sign?
It is, yes, it is, because you rarely get one type of abuser. So a person who physically abuses you will also verbally abuse you. They go together. Will psychologically abuse you and will try to control the money. And controlling the money is, I mean, in Linda's story, she was impoverished because she signed all the agreements for his cars, many of which he crashed. She signed the mortgage agreement. You know, and in the very early stages, she had a car which she loved, as she says in her story, and they had just got married a short time, I think, at that stage. And he wanted to buy a car for himself, or a van for a bit, and he persuaded her to sell her car, to trade her car in, because he didn't have the money to buy the new car himself. And the way he did it was through psychological abuse, which is becoming sour. A person who uses psychological abuse is sour. The whole atmosphere in a house is sour, you know. And, you know, so in order to satisfy him, because she loved him, she traded in the car. Yeah.
Isolation is another layer to it, I suppose,
Absolutely.
isn't it, Jim, after this quick commitment happens?
Yes, because if you isolate somebody, they have no support, and then you have more freedom to abuse. And would say, I mentioned earlier that if a pattern emerges shortly after commitment, say the person is easily angered, often suffer from road rage. Now, on their own, these are not signs of abuse, but it's the combination. They're very irritable. They run down other people. They're very anti-authority, and they're very critical and judgmental. And what they often do is they begin to criticize your friends, run them down. And I have never met, well, rarely have I met a victim of abuse who hasn't been isolated. And hopefully when they leave the abusive situation, they have to try and pick up and contact their friends, and that can be difficult because friends feel that they have been deserted, if you like, because they do not understand. And what happens, why people find it very difficult to leave an abusive relationship, is this Jekyll and Hyde personality. They fall in love with the Jekyll, the nice Jekyll, and that's all they think about. And they fail to see the nasty Hyde, and they're always hoping for the nice Jekyll to re-emerge, and he does, because abuse occurs in a cycle. So you have this kind of calm cycle, where the nice Jekyll is there. Then the irritation builds up, and then there's an explosion. You know. And that's what keeps people in relationships.
It's an enormously complex area.
It is very
Jim,
complex, yes. It's very difficult to put in a
just
small
scratched the surface of it. The book is called Abuse, Domestic Violence, Workplace and School Bullying.
Yeah.
But if people want to know more about that and also more about where to go and what to do if they find themselves in that situation, they can check out your website, www.jimoshay.net. And of course there are numerous organisations who will offer help as well. And we will put details of that up. If we haven't put them up on the screen, they'll be on the website later on.
They will indeed.
Jim O'Shea, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim.